During the early years of World War II, the Pacific skies were dominated by fierce aerial battles between American and Japanese aircraft. Among these, the Grumman F4F Wildcat stood as the mainstay of the U.S. Navy's fighter fleet during the initial stages of the conflict. When it first encountered Japan's agile and deadly Mitsubishi A6M Zero, many assumed that the Wildcat was hopelessly outclassed. Yet, Japanese reports about the aircraft were not entirely dismissive. Instead, they reveal a complex mixture of respect for its ruggedness and ridicule for its perceived lack of maneuverability. The Wildcat's reputation among Japanese pilots evolved through experience, reflecting a deeper understanding of both its limitations and its strengths. To understand these perceptions, it is important to examine Japanese combat reports, intelligence assessments, and post-war analyses that shed light on how enemy aviators viewed this iconic American fighter. This discussion explores whether Japanese assessments of the F4F Wildcat leaned more toward mockery or admiration, and how those views influenced both Japanese tactics and the larger aerial war in the Pacific. The first encounters between Japanese pilots and the F4F Wildcat occurred during the early months of 1942, when the Imperial Navy was sweeping across the Pacific. Pilots flying the A6M Zero, known for its exceptional agility and climb rate, often described the Wildcat as sluggish and unrefined. Early reports mocked its heavy frame, slower roll rate, and inferior turn radius, leading some Japanese aviators to underestimate it. However, they quickly learned that the Wildcat was not as easy a target as it appeared. Japanese intelligence officers initially categorized the F4F as an outdated, lumbering fighter unsuited to modern aerial combat. Yet, the longer the war went on, the more respect it gained, particularly for its defensive capabilities and its ability to withstand punishment that would have destroyed a Zero. This evolving perception reflects a shift from ridicule based on first impressions to reluctant acknowledgement of the aircraft's resilience, of the disciplined tactics of its pilots. Japanese ridicule of the F4F Wildcat often stemmed from a fundamental misunderstanding of its design philosophy. Unlike Japanese aircraft engineers, who prioritized speed and agility above all else, Grumman built the Wildcat to endure battle damage and return home. Its rugged frame, self-sealing fuel tanks, and armor plating were revolutionary for naval fighters of the time. Japanese reports mocked the Wildcat's bulkiness, calling it clumsy and overweight, but these same traits allowed it to survive hits that would have incinerated a Zero. This contrast in design philosophy became a defining factor in how both nations approached air combat. The Japanese valued offensive maneuverability, while the Americans valued survivability and tactical discipline. Eventually, even Japanese officers began to note that Wildcat pilots could sustain damage and still fight effectively, while a single well-placed bullet could turn a Zero into a fireball. Thus, what began as ridicule slowly transformed into respect for the Wildcat's practical, battle-hardened design. The battles over Wake Island and Midway offered the Japanese their first prolonged exposure to the Wildcat in combat. During the Wake Island defense in December 1941, a small group of Marine Corps F4F pilots fought valiantly against overwhelming odds. Although Japanese pilots reported the Wildcats as easily destroyed, the Americans inflicted surprising losses. By the Battle of Midway in June 1942, Japanese reports began noting that the Wildcat's defensive tactics, particularly the thatch weave, made it a difficult opponent to shoot down. What had seemed like an inferior machine turned out to be part of a coordinated and effective fighting system. Japanese debriefs after Midway acknowledged the skill and discipline of American pilots and the resilience of their aircraft. These observations marked a subtle shift in tone, from ridicule of a supposedly outdated design to cautious respect for its combat effectiveness when used properly. As encounters continued through 1942 and 1943, Japanese pilots began to reassess their earlier judgments of the F4F Wildcat. They realized that while the Zero could outmaneuver it in a turning fight, the Wildcat excelled in diving and defensive maneuvers. American pilots avoided traditional dogfights, favoring boom and zoom attacks and coordinated teamwork. Japanese intelligence officers noted this change, remarking that the Wildcat's pilots were learning to use their aircraft strengths to counter Japan's superior agility. This tactical evolution forced Japanese units to adapt, emphasizing energy management and situational awareness, rather than relying solely on turn fighting. Reports from captured pilots and recovered documents indicated growing Japanese awareness that the Wildcat's sturdiness and teamwork made it far more dangerous than expected. Respect replaced ridicule as the Japanese realized that underestimating their opponents could lead to devastating losses. Japanese pilots, trained in an ethos that glorified individual heroism and aerial dominance, initially viewed the Wildcat as an easy kill. But as their comrades began to fall to American tactics, psychological unease set in. Reports began describing the Wildcat as a stubborn beast, hard to destroy even after multiple hits. Pilots expressed frustration that what they saw as a technically inferior plane continued to hold its own. This resilience shook their confidence, especially as American carrier forces began to recover and strike back. Japanese officers used these experiences to caution against arrogance in combat reports, emphasizing that even seemingly clumsy opponents could be formidable when well trained. The F4F thus became a symbol of the growing parity in the Pacific Air War, proof that technological superiority alone could not guarantee victory. In this sense, Japanese reports show both grudging admiration and frustration toward the aircraft and its pilots. Japanese engineers eventually gained access to damaged or captured examples of the F4F Wildcat, allowing them to conduct technical analyses. These evaluations confirmed earlier observations about its robustness. Engineers noted the thick armor plating, strong landing gear, and efficient control systems, even though they criticized its heavier weight and lower climb rate. Interestingly, several Japanese technical officers expressed admiration for its balance between protection and performance, qualities absent in the fragile Zero. Reports circulated among senior officers highlighting that while the Wildcat lacked elegance, it was an engineering success for mass production and combat survivability. These analyses contributed to a more measured and respectful tone in Japanese intelligence summaries by late 1942. The respect stemmed not from aesthetic or maneuvering superiority, but from the aircraft's reliability, a quality increasingly valued as Japan's own aircraft began to suffer heavy losses. Japanese comparisons between the A6M Zero and the F4F Wildcat often revealed national differences in design philosophy. The Zero's unmatched agility and climb rate initially made it the terror of the Pacific. However, Japanese reports gradually admitted that the Wildcat's heavier armor and rugged frame made it a better long-term combat aircraft. The Zero could not absorb damage, and its lack of armor and sealing fuel tanks often led to catastrophic losses. Japanese pilots found themselves forced to disengage after suffering minor hits. While the Wildcat could take multiple rounds and keep flying, this realization led to a grudging respect for American design priorities. Reports noted that while the Zero symbolized purity of flight, the Wildcat embodied durability and endurance, qualities increasingly admired as Japan's war situation worsened. Thus, what began as ridicule of an ungainly machine became acknowledgement of an aircraft that embodied the practical realities of modern warfare. The Solomon Islands campaign of 1943-1943 offered numerous opportunities for the Japanese to evaluate the F4F Wildcat F Wildcat in extended operations. Pilots reported that the Wildcat's persistence in combat, combined with the Americans' disciplined team tactics, made it a far more dangerous foe than earlier thought. Although Japanese units still held technical superiority in some areas, the Wildcat's combat record was improving rapidly. Reports from the field began to shift tone. Japanese commanders advised pilots to avoid underestimating the Wildcat and to engage it using vertical rather than turning tactics. This acknowledgement of its capabilities reflected a maturing respect within Japanese air strategy. The Wildcat had evolved from a mocked opponent into a respected adversary that demanded tactical adaptation. Such reports reveal the transition from overconfidence to caution, a psychological and strategic shift that reflected the broader turning of the tide in the Pacific War. After Japan's surrender, surviving pilots and officers reflected more objectively on their wartime experiences. Many post-war memoirs mention the F4F Wildcat with a surprising degree of respect. Veteran aviators acknowledged that their early disdain for the aircraft had been misplaced. They admired its toughness, its pilot protection, and the professionalism of those who flew it. Some even described it as the iron airplane that refused to die. These reflections highlight the humility that came with hindsight, as Japanese airmen recognized that the Wildcat had played a crucial role in halting Japan's early momentum. The shift from ridicule to respect symbolizes a broader realization about the importance of balanced design and teamwork over individual prowess. Post-war evaluations by Japanese historians often echoed these sentiments, emphasizing that the Wildcat's combination of reliability and strategy made it a cornerstone of American naval aviation. The story of how Japanese perceptions of the F4F Wildcat evolved reflects deeper cultural and strategic contrasts. The initial ridicule mirrored Japan's early wartime arrogance and faith in superior craftsmanship and flying skill. The later respect illustrated a growing recognition of American adaptability, industrial strength, and pragmatic engineering. The Wildcat symbolized the endurance of the U.S. Navy during its darkest months, and its ability to fight on despite disadvantages mirrored the broader resilience of the American war effort. For the Japanese, the Wildcat became a lesson in humility, proof that warfare favored not just elegance and agility, but also toughness, teamwork, and tactical innovation. The gradual shift in Japanese tone from mockery to admiration is, therefore, not just about an airplane, but about a transformation in military understanding and respect between two formidable adversaries. In conclusion, Japanese reports on the F4F Wildcat reveal a fascinating journey from ridicule to respect. Initially dismissed as slow and clumsy, the Wildcat earned admiration through its durability, strategic effectiveness, and the professionalism of its pilots. Japanese assessments evolved as first-hand experience demonstrated that the Wildcat's design philosophy, emphasizing survival and teamwork, was ideally suited for the harsh realities of naval warfare. By the end of the war, even Japan's most skilled aviators recognized that the Wildcat's supposed weaknesses were, in fact, its greatest strengths. This transformation in perception reflects the larger dynamics of the Pacific conflict, where underestimation gave way to hard-earned respect. The Wildcat may never have been the fastest or most graceful fighter in the sky, but it was one of the most respected, by friend and foe alike. Its legacy endures as a symbol of grit, ingenuity, and the respect born from worthy opposition.